Since time immemorial, the planet of Ryushi had been a location selected for yautja hunts, a prime spot for their rite of passage, to kill the ultimate prey and become a blooded hunter. Other than this activity, the planet and its resources had been unmolested, until man's progress reached outwards into the stars. Ryushi was now home to the colony of Prosperity Wells, a ranching colony owned by the Chigusa Corporation, supervised by its new overseer, Michiko Noguchi. The indigenous cattle-like creatures, the Rinth, were reared for their meat, and the year's harvest was coming to what seemed to be a successful close. Among the populations of ranchers, their families, company employees, and other civilians, Ryushi's population consisted of roughly 150 humans. Though small, the Prosperity Wells colony ran efficiently with a few of home's comforts. Its layout demonstrates the workings of the colony and its locations. Chigusa Corp's offices and op center, mess hall, and living quarters for Chigusa employees. Heavy equipment storage and mechanics crane. Main garage. Abattoir and local holding pens. Powerhouse and sewage treatment plant. Main well and pumping station. Preloading pen. Loading ramps. Spacecraft cargo doors and shield wall to protect complex from spacecraft's engine wash. Container storage and main loading crane. School and recreation center, including theater and mini sports arena, baseball diamond, and soccer field. Main transmitting antenna. Little Earth shopping complex. Med center and helipad. Quarantine pens and holding pens for the Rinth. If it wasn't Earth, at least an attempt had been made to make it try to look like a town. There were hardly enough people in the gene pool to turn the planet into anything civilized, and even with more settlers, it wasn't likely to ever be a major population center. Still, the company had made a token effort to make it look like home. Noguchi had thoroughly studied the layout of the colony despite mostly staying in her office and living quarters during her first 6 months. Besides seeing an occasional screening at the Rex Theater, she hadn't really been a member of the community. It wasn't her home, and she wasn't going to try to stay here any longer than it took to show a profit and shine in the company's eyes enough to earn a transfer to the next rung on the ladder. Her predecessor, Hiroki, would be leaving after the harvest with a promotion, and she looked to his success as a template to achieve her own. Not just success, as she saw. Honor. But in her 6 months, she gained only resentment from the ranchers, only focused on the numbers and the bottom line. Her approach was not exactly hands-on, as Hiroki's was, and most of the ranchers spoke to him instead. Hiroki had offered Noguchi advice to better her ability as supervisor, that she may want to try some of the methods that worked well for him and his relationship with the ranchers, eloquently suggesting she go out more and get some Rinth shit between her toes. Noguchi had taken this advice to heart and was working to better her management in time for the harvest's end. The Chigusa vessel, the Lecter, was en route to the rancher planet to pick up the Rinth cargo, with some final employee corporation negotiations taking place as the deadline fast approached. Before the arrival of the Lecter, however, different visitors loomed over. Dachande, the experienced and battle-worn yautja, was leading a clan of the unblooded to the previously vacant planet, all hungry to hunt and kill the perfect prey. Conde Admita. Hard meat. With the captured Xenomorph queen supplying eggs, and boarded into a piece of technology referred to colloquially by the hunters as the Two Decay Calais, the eggs were dispersed within the open desert. At first, there was only the vision of dark, cracked matter all around, seen through a thick cloud of oily smoke. The electronic eye scanned the pit and then looked up. With a sudden lurch, the Two Decay Calais moved forward, using its segmented pincers to pull itself out of the crater. It was a large, armored mechanism, the Two Decay Calais, designed to withstand almost any type of environment so far encountered. It was actually modeled after a kind of predator discovered on Than, a world of dense metals and poisonous weather. Something like the hard meat, but more efficiently built. It could climb, walk, run, or dive into liquid. And while the robot crawler did not hunt, as well as the real creature could, it served a purpose that was more important than simple survival. It was the bearer of life. Le Decay Calais was a joke, really, a derogatory term that was sometimes used for a female, literally, child maker. The heavy ramp in the tail of the crawler lowered and the machine began its function. An egg, the beginning of the hunt, made its way gently down the plated ramp to be deposited on the dusty ground. Dachande rolled the control bar on the table in his private chamber. The front view appeared again in the oval's monitor screen. The crawler went toward a high mountain of some unknown material. This world was a warm place, but not as humid as some. Twin suns and no freestanding liquid in sensory range. The read on the crawler showed that there were still dozens of eggs to be set. The red lines and smudges of the counter changed with each placement. Each egg was coded and tuned to a reader that would maintain the connection even after the egg hatched and became hard meat. They would not leave the hunt until all the prey had been taken. To leave even a single one behind was criminal. Dachande had not visited this place before, although the records show that there had been hunts here many seasons earlier. It was listed as wide and spacious, with no antagonists and many hiding places. Large, four-legged creatures dwelled there naturally, ideal hosts, perfect for training. They would go in fast and dark, that was standard, but there could hardly be anything on the planet to cause them any problems. It was but another dry world with little to offer save a place to hunt. The galaxy was full of such places. As the leader of the Yautja prepared his group for prosperity to come, Machiko made the effort to prepare the same for her own. As she walked between shelves piled high with bike and copter parts, she heard voices from the direction of the open entryway into the yard. She could make out the distinct soft tone of Hiroki's voice, among the others. He sounded irritated. Noguchi slowed her pace to catch the gist of the conversation she was about to walk into. "Not the point, Hiroki. The company's making a killing from our sweat, and we're getting screwed. Right, Ackland? That's the way the Ranchers Association sees it." Noguchi waited just inside the door to listen for another comment. Several ranchers and Hiroki stood in a loose circle several meters away. She could just see the edge of Ackland's heavy rinthhide coat, which he wore even on the hottest day. He was a large, opinionated man who had an amazing ability to cause friction. "I don't even know why I'm discussing this with you," said Hiroki. "Miss Noguchi is in charge now. You should be talking to her." A perfect cue. Noguchi stepped forward and through the entry. "That bitch? She doesn't give a shit about us," said Ackland. "Maybe if she got laid once in a while," started one of the other ranchers, Rick Harrison. "Anybody who tried would freeze his dick off," said one of Ackland's men. The group chuckled, all except Hiroki. Harrison broke off abruptly when he spotted her striding toward them. He coughed suddenly into his hand. "Miss Noguchi," he said. His voice was loud. She held her head high and stared at him. He dropped his gaze, as did the other men. Only Ackland had the nerve to meet her eyes. "I thought we were in the middle of a roundup, gentlemen," she said, voice cool. Hiroki stepped in. "We were just discussing the agreement their association has already signed." Ackland tapped his pipe with the heel of one hand. "That was before we saw what the market was doing back on Earth. If we'd known the price of meat was going to jump like this, we'd have asked for more." "And if the bottom had fallen out of the market, would you have offered to take less?" said Hiroki. All eyes turned to Noguchi. She faced Ackland, obviously the man to negotiate with. "I'll talk to the company and see if I can swing a larger cut for your ranchers," she said. "We want to be fair." Ackland nodded and tugged at his dirty red beard. He opened his mouth to speak, but Noguchi cut him off. "But there won't be anything for everyone if your Rinth aren't ready for shipment when the Lector arrives." She noted his flash of annoyance with smug satisfaction. No matter what she changed, Ackland was never going to be a man she enjoyed working with. "I suggest you get back to your jobs." She smiled at the others as they followed Ackland across the yard. Hiroki raised his eyebrows at her after the ranchers had reached a safe distance. "Pleasant man, Ackland," he said blandly. "Perhaps someday we'll marry," she said, keeping a straight face. Hiroki grinned. "Let's saddle up," said Noguchi. She shaded her eyes against the suns and looked out at the open plain. "I'm ready to get some Rinth shit between my toes." "Words of wisdom," said Hiroki. Noguchi nodded and then walked with Hiroki toward the hoverbikes. Already she felt as if she'd set wheels in motion, and once started, there would be no turning back. The young males stood in standard formation and watched Dachande expectantly. The Keyright stank of musk, and the air was alive with tension. He had made them wait long enough. It was time. Dachande looked at the heaps of armor and weaponry that Skempte and Warka had lined up against the wall. "You may collect your awayusa," he said, waving at the armor. "Now." With passionate cries of excitement, the Yautja ran to the piles of equipment and hard meat shell, shoving and kicking to get there first. There was enough to suit them all, of course, but they would fight for the better trappings. The stronger males would get the prime supplies. That was always the way. Dachande watched as the Yautja strapped on the scarred platings and struggled for arm sheaths and masks. Shafted knives were weighed and measured, burners' sights checked. Medkits and multiple eyes weren't standard for a young male's armor, nor were Terrason loops. Only the warriors used such additions. There was shift capacity in a few of the suits, but the young males would not need such things anyway. The first hunt was more a matter of point and kill than tracking and hiding. Invisibility was generally reserved for prey that shot back. You had to earn the right to use the better gear, and the prey for which it was necessary. The Yautja would need to become accustomed to their Awiyusa, to feel comfortable with movement and weight. Dachande himself had slept in his armor for the first night he had donned it. They had worn the gear only briefly during their training and under strict supervision. For this there were reasons, the main being that a young male given too much power too early was a hazard to himself and others. Turn some of the wet-behind-the-knees younglings loose with a burner even a few weeks ago, and there would have been the risk of holes in the ship's hull or bodies piled in the corridors. The ceiling of the firing range had more scars than a ceremonial blood pig. Dachande watched Tichinde backhand the smaller male for the mask he held and hissed triumphantly at the gain. The leader nodded thoughtfully. Tichinde was strong but reckless. Such recklessness could get him killed. Did he survive, however, he could be a great warrior and a credit to his teacher. It was far better to be brave and die than to be cowardly and survive by hiding from the Black Warrior. Songs were not sung about those who showed their back to an attack. The young males were as ready as he could make them. He hoped they were ready enough. If they were not, it was too late. And too bad their successes or failures would start soon on the planet now speeding toward them. The hunt was about to begin. Noguchi rode slightly behind Hiroki through the mid-afternoon light, their hoverbikes setting up whirls of baked tan dust and hot pebbles in their wake. Earlier they had skimmed the inner ridges of the gorge and then circled back to town for a light lunch. Now they were headed out again, toward the Bariki Canyon, one of the primary runs for the majority of the herds. Noguchi had spent most of the morning getting used to the flyer's controls. Fortunately, they weren't too hard to figure out. Stop, go, height, and speed adjustments. The trick was to watch for obstacles that might cause problems. Jump a big rock too fast and you could find yourself on your back, your scooter flying merrily along with you, at least until the dead-hand control shut it down. Besides basic instructions and a few landscape remarks through the comm sets, Hiroki had kept quiet during their ride. It was the longest she'd spent outdoors since arriving on Ryushi. The heat was incredible, the rays from two suns slapping at them with tangible force. Very winds ruffled the tips of her black hair at the base of her visor, and particles of sandy dirt kicked up by Hiroki's bike pelted her goggles and dusted her cheeks. Ahead and all around, huge cliffs encircled them. Initially, it had all looked the same, harsh and unforgiving, but she had to admit there was a sparse beauty to the plains as well. It recalled images of sand gardens that Noguchi had visited in her youth in Kyoto. Here the sand was unchanneled and pocked with planets and rocks. Knee-high stands of beige reeds grew randomly near the edges of the valleys. Stones jutted from the earth in layers of shaded browns and grays. The fractured topsoil was a huge jigsaw puzzle with no end. There was plenty of sand, to be sure, but no order here, no simple Zen lines. It was raw chaos. Billions of years in the making, this world, and she and a handful of men and women now held sway over it, masters of all dry land. It was not hard to believe in manifest destiny out here in the far reaches of the galaxy, that mankind's true role was to minister to and control all things. Noguchi could understand, at least intellectually, why the ranchers had left Earth to make Ryushi their home. There was a kind of freedom to the prairies, a calm serenity to the stark lands. A certain beauty in it all. On Earth, a single living plex could house 50,000 people in tight, tiny cubicles. On Earth, open land still existed, but under so many regulations that just to walk upon it without a proper license might be worth a year in prison. Nowhere on the homeworld was there such vast emptiness as was all around her here. She found herself even enjoying the weather as they neared the southern end of Berkey Canyon, the simplicity of a dry wind in her face. She wondered if it was too late for this new understanding to change her standing with the ranchers, perhaps with time. "We're coming upon one of Ackland's camps," Hiroki crackled in her ear. "Right." She slowed as they rounded a bend in the gully. There were several dozen Rinth grazing on weeds in a couple of 100 meters ahead and beyond the large treaded vehicle that Ackland used to check on his herds. The crawler could hold 20 people comfortably and was equipped with a full kitchen and sleeping accommodations for at least 6. Most of the ranchers had automatic vehicles, AVs, but Ackland's was the biggest. Of course. Noguchi came to a stop next to Hiroki's bike and dismounted, legs still throbbing with the feel of the engine. Ackland and several of his people stood grouped near the AV and watched them approach. Noguchi set her eye protectors up on her cap and patted dust from her clothing as they neared Ackland. The big man gazed at them with a sneer. "What's the problem, Hiroki? You and the boss lady get lost?" "We're just making the rounds," began Hiroki. "Yeah, right." Ackland grinned without humor. "What's the real reason? The company shot down the price increase?" Noguchi cleared her throat. "You know we can't get through the magnetic interference during the day. I'll contact them this evening." Ackland scoffed and started to turn away. "And," she continued, "I'll do all I can to get you a bigger cut." Ackland raised an eyebrow. "So what are you doing here?" He made no effort to keep the irritation out of his voice. Hiroki remained silent. "We're checking on everyone's progress, seeing if there's anything we can do to help," she said. The late afternoon light glinted off the AV's pitted hull behind him as Ackland looked her up and down. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, you can help. You can stay out of our way. The last thing we need is help from corporate paper pushers." He faced the young woman next to him and pointed to the shaded monitor built into the AV. "Roth, take some of the boys and run these gullies. Drive them down into the canyon and hook up with Cho's group." Roth nodded and motioned to two of the men in Ackland's company. Ackland presented his back to Noguchi and Hiroki and punched at the controls set into the monitor's rim. Apparently, they had been dismissed. They walked back to their bikes slowly. Hiroki placed a hand on her forearm gently as they reached the flyers. "I'm sorry about the way Ackland treated you," he said. Noguchi shrugged. "Actually, it's okay. I know how—" She paused, searched for the right word. "I know what kind of an uncaring bitch I've been. I would have been surprised if he had any other reaction. It is as if I had been in some kind of suspended animation for the past few months. I cannot explain it." She pulled her visor down firmly and looked toward Prosperity Wells, about to say something else, except all thoughts disappeared. "Wow," she whispered. "What?" Hiroki looked past her. "Oh yes, you haven't gotten out much since you arrived, have you?" Noguchi barely heard him. The suns were setting. The desert was bathed now in golds and reds. Long shadows stretched from the mountain toward them, and in the cloudless sky the arrangement of shade and light left her breathless. It was actually the first time she had ever seen the sunset outside. Her mind couldn't pair the stunning sight with the thought she'd had of Ryushi for the past 6 months. She would have to let one or the other go. Ryushi was, in its way, a beautiful place. At least here and in this moment it was. Noguchi sighed and watched the sunset, Hiroki quiet beside her. When they finally mounted their bikes to head home, she felt as if a heavy weight had been lifted from her shoulders, one she had not been aware of until it was gone. My job, my life, to that point, had been concerned with schedules and numbers and quarterly reports. A full, satisfying life, I thought. Seeing the sunset that day, I suddenly realized how much I'd been missing. Little did I know that that would be the last time I'd ever view a sundown with any emotion other than dread. At 3:15 in the morning, Jamie Roth leaned against her flyer and watched for Ackland's headlights. The night was hot and free of wind, and stars twinkled faintly over the mountains. Her dog, Creep, lay panting at her feet, occasionally whining at the bulging sack hooked to the scooter's seat. The AV came rumbling around the bend up ahead and squealed to a halt in front of her, the headlights almost blinding her to her dark, adjusted eyes. Ackland climbed down from the cab almost before the transport had stopped moving. Roth unhooked the sack and started toward him, Creep at her heels. He looked at the Rinth beyond her and walked quickly to meet them halfway. "I got your message, Roth." He sounded out of breath. "What's the problem?" "Take a look," she said, and crouched down to empty her find onto the dusty ground. Creep growled at the lifeless things and backed away. Roth seared one of the 3 creatures with a Rinth stick and held it up for Ackland to see. It looked like nothing so much as a huge spider with a spiny tail, a little smaller than a male firewalker, perhaps 2 handspans. Its long, segmented legs curved under its plated body, and its half-meter tail looked prehensile. There were no eyes as far as Roth could tell, but there was a short, fleshy tube that perhaps served as a mouth. It hung limply at the end of the creature. The thing was mottled slate gray all over. Ackland took the stick from her and studied it carefully. "What the hell is it?" His voice was thick with disgust. "Besides uglier than shit?" I was hoping you could tell me, she said. Ackland frowned and set the spider down next to the other two. I've never seen anything like these. Where'd you find them? Up at the head of Bariki Canyon. There were a couple of dozen of them lying around dead. She brushed a long strand of sun-bleached hair out of her eyes and looked over at the Rinth. A few of them lowed mournfully, the sounds quiet in the still air. That's where we scared up these pokesnoots. They were stumbling around and bumping into each other like they were half asleep. She rose to her feet and faced Ackland, who also stood. I think maybe they're sick, Mr. Ackland. I thought you should know. What did T-Stone say? Tests all clean so far. Ackland tipped his wide-brimmed hat back on his head and nodded at her. You did the right thing, Roth. He looked at the herd and then down at the alien things thoughtfully. Roth waited. We don't know that there's anything wrong with the Rinth, he said carefully. And we wouldn't want some dickhead from the company to panic and set up a quarantine, right? Ackland's speculative gaze turned to her face. I mean, we've invested a lot of time here. And something like that, well, that would mean that some of us wouldn't get the payoffs that we deserve. He trailed off, leaving the obvious unstated. Roth chewed at her lower lip and nudged one of the creatures with one boot. Ackland was a greedy man, but he would be a rich greedy man within the week. And she had checked the main herd before she had called him. The only affected Rinth were the 30-plus head behind her. Something like this could ruin all that she had worked for herself. Roth shrugged mentally, her decision made. This was Ackland's problem now. I understand. Ackland grinned and rocked back on his heels, nodding. But what do I do with these things? She said. Take them to Dr. Revna. But tell him you found them in Iowa Gorge, okay? He put one hand on her shoulder and squeezed lightly. You're doing a good job, Roth. There will be a bonus for you when this roundup is over. She shoved the creatures back into the bag with the Rinth stick and loaded it into the bike for the trip into town. Come on, creep. She patted her thigh and the herd dog followed her back to the watch. The Rinth that weren't asleep lay at their sides, panting heavily. Wet ropes of mucus hung from their mouths and trembled with each gasp. Pokesnoots were stupid beasts, but she didn't like to see them this way, like they had swallowed something poison. Noguchi sat on the rounded mat in her apartment and breathed deeply, head down. It was just after dawn, and today the lector came. She had awakened nervous and wanted to try to relax before starting the final roundup, but it had been almost a month since her last real practice, and she could feel the muscles in her legs groaning from the stretch. She had gotten her brown belt in karate before she'd left Earth for Ryushi, and had not been far away from black. While there were hollow teaching devices that she could train on at the rec center, she had decided to put her lessons aside for a while, at least until she found a human sparring partner. Hollows weren't a bad way to go, but they lacked something. Dignity, perhaps. But she hadn't made any close enough friends to work out with. No friends, Machiko. Close or otherwise. Don't kid yourself. Right. Most ranchers probably weren't into martial arts anyway. Her thighs trembled when she stood to form riding horse stance. Her old sensei, Master Ko, would have put her on the floor for letting herself go like this. She ran through the blocks and kicks to loosen up a little bit, and was surprised at the vague sadness she felt at the familiarity of the moves. Homesickness? No. She had left little behind on Earth worth missing. It was loneliness. The thought struck a chord within her that she hadn't felt for a very long time. It was the sense of not belonging. At least on Earth she had worked in an office building with thousands of other employees, had walked through streets full of people. She had been in a karate class. Noguchi hadn't been very close to anyone, but at least there had been that option. And here there was only Hiroki, who seemed to disapprove of her somehow, in spite of his smiling facade. Hiroki and a group of ranchers who didn't give a shit if she came or went. She ran through the rest of her workout quickly. Today would be a non-stop panic, supervising roundup and then preparations for the arrival of the lector. There were responsibilities to delegate and papers to shuffle. She wished there was someone to talk to, someone to commiserate with over the busy day to come. Well, there was no time to regret her choices now. There was too much to be done. She had practiced smiling and nodding, and tonight would be her first gesture of goodwill toward the ranchers. She hoped it would be the start of a new relationship of mutual respect. It has to be. Hiroki leaves in a few days with the Rinth shipment. Right. Time to get ready. Kesar Revna was fascinated. Alien biology was supposedly his forte, but he hadn't seen anything quite like it. He tried to keep up with the UMA reports from Earth, and Chigusa had a monthly online biomed journal that was one of the best. New species were being discovered every day, it seemed. But besides a mutant form of crab that had turned up on Terra Nova a few years back after a radioactive waste mishap, he found nothing in the literature that looked quite like this. I have to get back to work, Dr. Revna, if that's okay. He reluctantly looked up from the examination table at the young woman who had brought in the amazing creatures. Of course, he said. It's the big day, isn't it? Yeah. And you say you found these in Iowa Gorge? Yeah, right. She dropped her gaze to the table and shuddered slightly. Mr. Ackland said you might want to take a look at them. Give Mr. Ackland my thanks, and I appreciate you coming in. I know how busy you must be. Sure, no problem. Let us know how things turn out when you get a chance. She turned to walk out and nearly collided with Miriam, the town's human doctor and Kesar's wife, which made her Dr. Revna too. What do you make of this, Doc? Miriam laughed. Oh, thank you. Good morning, my love. How did you sleep? Miriam bent over the table and raised her eyebrows. She found this on Ryushi? Iowa Gorge, she says. And she also said that there were at least 20 more, dead. I've already tried to cut one of the legs with the Killian, and nothing. Not a scratch. You're kidding. Miriam searched his face for the joke. Any carbon-based animal. She trailed off. Silicon? Couldn't be, and even if it was, that would at least have been marked. She gazed at the specimen in wonder. What is it, Kesar? You're the DVM. He shook his head. I don't know. There was that Terra Nova mutation, and I heard some rumors about a weird life form found in a mining colony somewhere, but somebody clamped down on that, nothing substantiated. We're going to need to run some tests, and I think afterward, I'm going to take a little ride up to the gorge and poke around. Miriam frowned. Alone? Kesar nodded. He felt wired. This was a totally new species. One of us should stay in case of any problems with the herding. Anyway, like you just said, I'm the vet, right? If I can find one of these alive. It could bite you, Kesar. Perhaps you should wait a few days, until someone can come with you. Right, I need a guard to protect me from this little fist-sized spider. Don't worry, I'll be fine, Miriam. He patted her hand and smiled. I'll take a net and watch where I put my feet. He turned his attention back to the specimen, even though he was aware she was hovering there, concerned. The belly looks a little softer than the legs. I bet I can incise along this plate line. Could you please fetch me the scalpel kit? I'll peel this critter, one way or another. She pursed her lips doubtfully, but went to get the equipment from storage. He stooped over the alien again, already lost in thought. Miriam was a good doctor and a good spouse, but she worried too much. This creature was the most intriguing thing he'd come across on this planet so far. Hell, that's why he'd gotten into off-world medicine. Stuff like this. To have some new and fascinating creature with his own Latinized name hung on it and then studied in biology classes at prestigious universities was perhaps an egotistical wish, but not an immoral one, was it? Why, yes, this was the first of many unique life forms discovered by the galactically famous Dr. Kesar Revna. A minor find compared to his later work, of course, but even great men must have beginnings. Let him stand as an example to you all. He smiled at the fantasy. How could anyone fear such a unique find? Besides, the creature was probably as harmless as his fantasy of academic greatness. They landed on the parched world in the bottom of a vast ravine, far from where the Lou de Kalai had sown the hard-meat eggs. They came in cloaked and during light hours, although the hunt would not begin until after dark. It was all standard procedure. There were some worlds upon which the natives had developed weaponry and would fight for their skins, infected or not. The Chande had not lived long by being careless on strange terrain, and the planet had not been used for a hunt so recently that precautions could be discarded. Especially now, because since the Yautja's last visit to hunt here, others had come. The soft meat, bleeding all over the radio bands for all to hear. It was a shock to find them here. Given his choice, he would hunt the soft meat, a thing he had long desired. They were cunning, and they shot back. Soft meat skulls were highly prized, the centerpiece of a warrior's trophy wall. He would challenge them, were it all possible, but not with a handful of raw and unseasoned would-be warriors. Not only would it be foolish, it would also be against the rules of the hunt. The Chande could almost smell them, the soft meat, and he would like nothing better than to test his mettle against them, but he would not this time. He had responsibilities, duties, and to cast them aside for his personal satisfaction would be to dishonor his name. Dachande turned and walked through the corridor toward the front of the ship. As leader, he would be the first to set foot on the hunting grounds, a pleasure that rumbled deep in his gut. This would be a good hunt, umans notwithstanding. Twilight fell over Prosperity Wells. The Chigusa staff had been setting up tables and portable roasting pits near the shield wall when Noguchi had gone to shower and change, but she was surprised at the crowd that had gathered in her short absence. She stepped out of her building and was nearly run over by a group of giggling children. Not many of those here, children, but some. The scent of grilled rinth steaks carried to her along with the sounds of people talking and laughing. Ranchers and their spouses walked past, hand in hand, all headed toward the landing pad. Noguchi joined them. Hiroki was easy to spot amid the ranchers in his dark dress suit. He stood near the loading ramp, drink in hand. He returned her wave and wove his way through the crowd to meet her. "You look lovely, Michiko-san." "Thank you. You look very nice yourself." She gazed wonderingly at the mass of people all around. "Is every person on the planet here?" "Just about. A few of the staff are watching screens in ops, but other than that..." Noguchi smiled. 100 people in one place is now a mob to me. Funny how perspectives change. Hiroki nodded. "It is, and I'm glad to see them enjoying themselves. This is their first roundup, everything they've worked for 3 years. Noguchi looked around at the ranchers, relaxed and mingling in the open compound. It was impossible not to pick up on the mood of excitement and accomplishment. Someone had even fed music over the public address system. Couples danced in the deepening dusk while their children ran and played through the streets. "Come on, let's go greet the ship," said Hiroki. "It's due any minute." She followed him through the dancing crowd toward the antenna tower. "The home office called," he said mildly. "They've approved the price hike for the ranchers. I haven't told anyone. I figured you'd want the pleasure." Michiko raised her eyebrows and smiled at him. "Good. I can't wait to see Ackland's face. Where are we headed anyway?" "Up here. The tower is the only place to watch a landing." Hiroki stopped in front of the runged ladder that ran up one side of the transmitting structure and rested one hand on the lowest step. "Can that thing support both of us?" Noguchi looked at the ladder doubtfully. "Let's find out, shall we?" They scaled one story and hit the first landing, then slowly climbed the stairs to the top, 5 floors up. There was a moderate warm breeze blowing, and Noguchi looked down to see the miniature people milling about in the night air. It was easy to forget the pressures of work on such an occasion. Pleasant memories from long ago ran through her head. Nakama festivals with her parents, walking through bonsai forests that made her feel like a giant. A low rumbling began, somewhere in the sky. The people below watched the clouds for movement. Noguchi looked up to see the ship, and even so far away, she could tell it was big. Huge. It was hard for her mind to grasp such a gigantic object in the air. She had seen craft like it before, of course, but this one was bigger than the entire rec center and op building combined. It had pusher vents easily 20 meters long and half as wide on either side. There were 3 loading docks in front, each big enough to admit 4 rinth side by side. Giant air pushers swept a benign wind over the crowd as the ship rumbled toward the landing pad. With a roar that drowned out all other sound, the Lecter settled gently. It was quite a trick to land such a tub in atmosphere. The aerodynamics were hardly conducive to such things. The shield wall protected the complex from most of the engine wash, but the sudden gale that hit all of them was enough to whip up dresses and hair and a considerable haze of dust. As the thunder dwindled slowly, Noguchi heard a chorus of laughter and hand-clapping. It was a magnificent spectacle, the Lecter come to roost. Well, part of the ship anyway. The rest was still in orbit. A hand landed on her shoulder. Hiroki. He grinned at her. "Down to the final click, eh? Let's go introduce ourselves to the crew." They started toward the stairs, Hiroki leading. Noguchi cast one last look at the ship and thought about what he had said, the final kilometer. In spite of the mood of the evening, she had felt a chill at his words. Odd. She brushed the ominous speculation aside and went to join the party. Scott and Tom stepped off the ramp together in Prosperity Wells. For some reason, the mass of people assembled to greet them was a relief to Scott, although he wasn't sure why. Other crew members filed out past them to shake hands and chat with the ranchers and their families. "Hey, we're celebrities, man. Check it out," Tom mumbled. Scott smirked. It was true. The locals had gathered around each of the Lecter's crew with smiles and backslaps. Guess they don't get out much, Scott whispered. A tall, husky man with a red beard and a grin stepped toward them. He held out 2 cups of beer to the pilots. Ackland's the name, he said, extending his large hand. Tom shook it, then Scott. I'm head of the local Ranchers Association. How was your trip, Captains? Strandberg, said Tom, but just call me Tom. This is my co-pilot, Scott Conover. The trip was fine. Nice to meet you, sirs. Hope you and your crew are ready to party. We got some nice steaks on the grill. Ackland leaned closer and lowered his voice. And we got some fine young ladies looking for dance partners, I'll bet. That is, if you're inclined that way. Can I have your attention, please? A short Japanese woman in a green suit stood on a chair a few meters away, a dinner tray in hand. Can I have everyone's attention, please? She was pretty, that one. Scott looked her up and down. Nice legs, nice butt, a little shy in the breast department, but Scott had seen worse. Who's the babe? He said quietly to Ackland. You mean bitch, Ackland replied. Nitrogen Queen. That's the boss. Noguchi spoke out to the crowd once more, asking for their attention. I know you're all anxious for the festivities to begin, but first I have an important announcement. The crowd calmed as everyone turned to look at her. Loading will proceed as follows. Ackland, you're first on deck. Harrison's next, followed by Licini and Marietti. The rest of the assignments will be handed out tomorrow at dusk. She paused, then smiled. One more thing. The company gave their answer on the price adjustments. You'll be getting the increase you requested. Enjoy the party, everyone. She stepped off the chair to the sounds of scattered clapping and hoots of excitement. Go figure, said Ackland. Maybe she's good for something after all. Scott took a long gulp of beer and then laughed. I could think of a few other things she might be good at. Tom rolled his eyes, and Ackland shook his head. I wouldn't try it. Noguchi probably doesn't uncross her legs to take a shit, you know? Too bad, mumbled Tom. He wandered off. Scott took another slug and belched softly. Takes all kinds, right? He said, and looked into his cup. Not bad for a local brew. He picked out the Japanese woman again and studied her smile as she talked to some rancher woman. Ackland was babbling something about the weather, but Scott watched Noguchi. Dust ball it was, but this place wasn't a lost cause. He swigged more beer and turned his attention back to Ackland. Anything could happen in 3 days, no matter what the rancher said. Hell, nitrogen was his specialty. Noguchi walked toward the ops center, the party in full swing behind her. It was definitely a success, in more ways than one. A few of the ranchers had warmed toward her after the announcement, and she had kept up a steady patter of innocuous conversation for at least 2 hours. Nice people. And she had been doing a good job of nodding and smiling. Although, 1 day doesn't outdo 6 months of stupidity, Machiko. Right, but it was a start. For the ranchers, watching the sullen, plodding columns of the Rinth board the lector was the culmination of years of hard work. Every lumbering step, every nervous snort meant more credits in their account. The ranchers and their families had reason to celebrate, but the bustle and commotion filled me with melancholy. Perhaps it was the sorrowful braying of the Rinth that got to me, or maybe it was simply the knowledge that with this first phase of colonization completed, Hiroki would be leaving. I'd never expected much from him. After all, I was taking his job, but he hadn't let that affect his professionalism, or our relationship. Climbing the corporate ladder, I hadn't felt the need for friends, but Prosperity Wells was a long way from Chigusa headquarters. Here, the position and status were cold comfort during a 17-hour night. Now that Hiroki's departure was just a few weeks away, I realized how much I'd miss him. He was a friend. Maybe my only one. I'd have to make some changes. She walked into operations to see only one person manning the screens. Collins, right? She said hopefully. The young man nodded and stood up. Go join the party, okay? I'll watch things here for a while. Collins' eyes widened. Really? Thanks, Miss Noguchi. It's just Machiko from now on. She smiled at him and moved by so he could pass. Okay, he said. Machiko? He sounded uncomfortable with her first name, but he smiled back. He started to walk out and then turned. Oh, listen, when Doc Revna gets back, tell him the Home Office received his report. It's in the tray with his notes. Noguchi frowned. She had seen FemDoc at the party, but Revna hadn't been around, had he? Get back from where? She said. Said he was going up to Iowa Gorge to look for something, he said. He signed out a hover bike a couple hours ago. Today? Bad timing, she said. Yeah, that's what I said, Colin shrugged. But he said it was important. Listen, thanks again. After he had left, Noguchi sat at the console and gazed at the radar, lost in thoughts. She hadn't expected much from Hiroki at the beginning, but he had been unfailingly patient with her. His professionalism was top-notch. It would be sad to see him leave. She shook her head and glanced around for something to take her mind off Hiroki. Dr. Revna's report lay in a basket nearby, but she hesitated picking it up. What if it were private information? Then he wouldn't have let Colin send it. He would have done it himself. Brilliant. She picked up the stack of hard copy and leaned back in the chair. What the hell was in Iowa Gorge anyway? She liked the doc. He was a smart man. She leafed through the papers and settled down to read, with a silent wish for Revna to find whatever it was he was looking for. Kesar trained his binoculars on the site at the bottom of the gorge and inhaled sharply. His heart hammered in his chest and his hands shook. It was incredible. It was unbelievable. A dozen or so humanoids stood surrounding a large craft, the likes of which he had never seen. The ship looked like a cross between a fish and a huge engine tube. It was tinted a strange greenish hue, with the broad ramp set into the ground. The humanoids were tall. He couldn't be sure because of nothing to show relative size, and the scaler in his scope was malfunctioning, but he would guess 2.5 meters, maybe a little more. More amazing, they appeared to be carrying spears. Revna had stopped halfway down into the gorge, had parked his bike near some rocks 20 meters behind him or so. The adrenaline in his system was screaming at him to go back to the flyer, now. Big aliens with spears did not seem like the kind of folks you wanted to meet by yourself in the middle of the desert, but he couldn't stop looking at the amazing sight. He hit the full magnification button and the creature zoomed closer. Tall, muscular, definitely armed. Still too far away to get a good view, and it was also too bad the scope scaler was out of whack. He wanted to get a size on them. Whatever they were, they definitely were not human. Now here was a discovery that would get his name in the books. Not just a new species of spider or crab, but sentient aliens. He watched for another half-minute. What were they doing here? What were they? 100 questions formed and tried to rise all at once. Incredible. He licked his lips and focused on one of the alien faces, some kind of mask it wore, like the others. Breathing gear, perhaps? He would go back to town, get some of the ranchers, some photo equipment. Kesar blinked. One of the creatures turned and looked at him. It threw back its head. Its long, odd braids fell back. A long, crazy howl filled the canyon, echoed off of the cliffs, and beat at his ears, joined by the others. Impossible. He was mostly hidden from view, and he could hardly see them with the scope. They couldn't see him. But they did. He knew for sure in a second, when they ran toward him, waving their spears, screaming. The Chande spun, tusks flared, as the cries of his brood vibrated through the gorge, sounds of challenge, of aggression. Ooman. Warka spoke behind him, but the words were swallowed in the frenzy. The Chande gave orders without looking. Tell Skempte to prepare flight and gather those you can. Kikte! He ran, blade in hand. The hunt would have to be aborted, but the Ooman would die first. There was no other way. The Chande cursed mentally and ran faster. He was almost to the rocks when the noise of a craft starting hit him. Damn. If the Ooman got away, it would bring others. A single Ooman manned the ship, was balanced clumsily at the controls, hair swept back from an ugly, pale face. Revna ran to his bike, his stomach an empty hole. Stark terror made him fumble the starter. His hand shook uncontrollably. Start, please, oh please, start. He heard his own voice, and for a moment it sounded as if it belonged to someone else. The cycle roared to life. Relief rushed through him, cool and welcome. He stepped on the accelerator, hard, thinking only of escape. And he flew directly into them. He topped the rock formation, his thoughts clouded with panic. Turn, fool. One of the creatures leapt in front of him. He tried to swerve, but it was too late. The impact jarred him from his seat. He would have fallen except for the reflexive grab at the handles. The alien was huge. Revna caught a whiff of some musky, bitter oil. Its screech was one of pain and fury. It grabbed for him. Without thinking, Revna veered toward a cliff wall. The screaming thing smacked into the rocks, hard, and then was gone. He tried to regain control of the scooter, but the impact had thrown him into a turn. and the controls were damaged. He couldn't turn. The flyer responded sluggishly. "All right, don't panic, it's okay." He would have to use speed to get past them, have to go so fast they couldn't catch him, couldn't spear him. Another of the creatures reached for him, but he passed it. Revna smashed on the accelerator all the way forward as a blast of incredible heat blew by him. He ducked, felt his facial hair singe. The craft didn't want to alter its course. He was going to pass right next to the ship. The repellers still worked. He managed to trim the elevators and start to climb. 5 meters, 7, still heading right at the ship, but he would clear it. Another blast of heat. This one splashed the underside of the flyer, cooked plastic and metal. The repellers coughed and the craft dropped a meter, sputtered. He raised his watering eyes just in time to see that he was headed for the alien craft at high speed, and that he wasn't going to clear it. He was going to hit it dead center. Miriam. It was his last thought before the world turned to fire. The tiny flyer smashed into the ship and blew apart in a fireball that shattered both craft. A second later came another blast, bigger than the first. Flame and debris sprayed, scorched rocks, moved boulders, knocked over delicate formations that had stood undisturbed for millions of years. Huge chunks of burning ship flew through the gully as the hunters were blown to the ground by the blast. After a moment, Tichinde stood and looked around at his fallen peers. He waited to hear direction from the leader, but there were no instructive cries. Other Yautja rose to their feet, dazed. The leader had fallen not far from Tichinde. Several of the others stumbled with him to where Tichinde lay. The leader was barely alive. Wreckage had hit him, knocked him into Tikide, the sleep near death. A quick survey showed them that Warka, too, was dead, and the other blooded, Skemte, had been on the ship that still burned and smoked, and now looked like nothing so much as a gutted crab. No one would be leaving this world on that vessel, and it would be weeks, months, years perhaps, before anybody came to look for them. Not good. When all of the students alive had gathered around Tichinde counted. 10 of them. No transport and no elder to tell them what would happen. "What will we do?" from Esegan. "Tichinde still breathes," said Gikyon. "We could—" "You are a medic?" Tichinde snorted. "He is beyond the aid kits. Look at him. Let him die honorably of his wounds. Wounds sustained in battle." He waved at the smoking ship. "The Ooman deliberately attacked us and killed our ship. Therefore, we will kill the Oomans. That is what we will do. Tichinde lives, but his time is short." Esegan growled. "Who proclaimed you leader?" His voice was thick with contempt. "You will not lead me. And hunting soft meat is forbidden to unblooded. Even a fool such as you knows this." Tichinde grinned and pointed his burner at the Yautja. Esegan took a step toward him, arms high. Tichinde fired. The blast blew Esegan against a pile of smoking rock. The others leapt back in surprise. "Others dispute?" Tichinde swung the burner in a circle. "I will spill your thway as easily as I do that of the Ooman dogs later. This is not a hunt, as that dead slave-to-rules thought, but self-defense. We are allowed to defend ourselves from attack, are we not?" Once again he waved at the ruins of their ship. None of the 9 disagreed. They watched him warily, hands close to their own burners. There was a long moment when a challenge might have come, but one of the 9 might have taken it upon themselves to raise his burner and try him, but that moment passed. If another would be leader, he would have made his move, and none did. Tichinde smiled. They would follow him, reluctantly or not. He raised his staff to the sky and screamed of revenge. When Gikyon returned from the wreck and handed him the smoldering Ooman skull a moment later, Tichinde crushed it with a bare claw to the approving hisses of the others. It had killed itself and bravely in the doing, so it could not be a proper trophy, but there would be others to be earned. The Yautja chanted and howled their approval into the night. Tichinde sent them to scavenge for whole weapons and armor. They were stuck there. So be it. The Oomans would be sorry they dared attack the Yautja. Sorry they dared to cross blades with Tichinde. Very sorry. The disparity in ratio between the smooth-backed specimens and the single carcass with dorsal spines notwithstanding, I believe the differences between the 2 types represent sexual indicators, not of the specimens themselves, but of the zygote, or egg, that each carries. As stated above, none of the specimens is equipped for independent life. Their sole purpose seems to be nothing more than that of a living delivery vehicle, an ambulatory penis, if you will. Noguchi tapped her cigarette without looking at the tray and skimmed back to the top of the page, totally absorbed. This is what Revna had gone after? Why hadn't he told anyone? Why hadn't he told her? While it is risky to postulate so much from such a tiny sample, we need to know as much as possible about these specimens as quickly as possible. If my assumptions are correct, or even near the mark, we're dealing with only one stage of this organism. The hybrid silicon-carbon cell construction would lead... Ambulatory penis, huh? Conjures quite an image, don't it? Noguchi jumped in her chair and turned quickly, heart pounding. A tall man with blonde hair and beard stood there, grinning. He swayed lightly on his feet. From the smell of him, he had been drinking. A lot. She stood and backed away a step. "You're from the Lecter, right?" The stranger took a step closer. "Hell, I fly that bucket," he belched softly. "Excuse me. Scott Conover, at your service." Noguchi smiled, but inched back a little more. His intentions weren't exactly clear, but one thing was. "You're drunk, Mr. Conover." "Yeah, but not too drunk, if you know what I mean. You're Miss Noguchi. I've been watching you." "It's Noguchi," she said coolly. "And you can call me ma'am." Conover laughed and reached out to take her hand. Noguchi tried to pull away, but the pilot gripped her wrist tightly. He leaned close, his alcohol breath moist and pungent. "I heard about what a tough lady you were. The company Ramrod, right?" His words slurred together slightly. The drunken pilot tried to pull her hand down to his crotch. "I got your ramrod right here, ma'am," he stage whispered. Noguchi narrowed her eyes and took a deep breath. Noguchi grabbed his arm above the elbow with her free hand and hooked one foot behind his. She twisted, pushing up and over at the same time, and the pilot went down. She jumped back and struck a ready pose, left foot forward, fists made. It had happened so fast she was barely aware that she had done it. The drunk groaned loudly. He didn't get up. Noguchi relaxed slightly, but kept her distance. Another man stepped into the room, dark-haired, wearing glasses. "Scott?" He looked down and moved immediately to the fallen man. "Jesus, what happened?" He stared up. He stared up at Noguchi, at her fighting stance. Realization dawned on his face. "You next?" Adrenaline still pumped through her system. The drunk's friend stood, hands in the air. No, I was just coming to tell you that the ship is loaded, and that we'll be making our first shuttle run as soon as the inspectors give the Rint the clean bill of health." He spoke all at once, in a rush, but seemed to catch himself. Noguchi nodded. "You'd better have them check out this pilot, too." She looked down at Conover and frowned. "Especially his judgment." "I'm Tom Strandberg, ma'am. I'm sorry about this. He's the designated drinker on this run." As the man spoke, he bent down and tried to help Conover to his feet. He grinned sheepishly. "Tomorrow, it'll be my turn." With a grunt of effort, Strandberg stood up, Conover half over one shoulder. "Your turn to drink, or your turn to get some of what I gave him?" Noguchi spoke sharply. She knew that none of this was Strandberg's fault, but damn him for excusing his friend so lightly. Attempted rape wasn't particularly funny. Strandberg edged toward the door with his heavy load. "Look, I'll make sure he doesn't bother you again, okay?" It seemed to be the perfect cue. Conover raised his head slightly. "Damn bitch," he mumbled, and nodded back out. Strandberg carried the other pilot out without another word. Noguchi sat back in her chair and felt her heart slow down a little. If she didn't receive a formal apology by the next morning, she would file a complaint with the company. Maybe I'll do that anyway. Conover certainly didn't deserve anything less of, "I got your ramrod right here." Noguchi picked up the paper she had been reading, a smile still on her face. Well, it had broken the tension she'd been feeling. After she'd read the same paragraph 3 times, she sighed and put the report down. This was important stuff, but she couldn't seem to regain her concentration after the rush of adrenaline. Besides, it was late. Revna must have gone to the party or just gone home. She stood, stretched, and yawned. Maybe she wasn't so very out of martial arts practice after all. She would talk to Revna tomorrow about these specimens. From the sound of it, there might be some crucial things going on out at Iowa Gorge, and it was her job to know about it. Scott hurt. He rolled his head and opened his eyes, but closed them again immediately. The whole fucking planet was spinning, and there was an earthquake or something. What planet? What the fuck? He mumbled. His eyes opened again. Back to the land of the living? Tom's face swam into view next to him. They were riding a small cart outside, back to the ship. The earthquake was the rumbling motor. On Ryushi, the Lecter, cowboys, Japanese babe. Scott focused on Tom's face. Noguchi, he said. It was coming back. Tom grinned. Scott, you're plowed. Apparently you tried to have sex with the head of the company here, a very capable woman who knocked the shit out of you before you got around to figuring out she wasn't interested. He paused for a second, and then added, and if you ask me, you're lucky she didn't rip your dick off and feed it to you. Great, said Scott. He closed his eyes, exhausted. Nice to have you on my side, old buddy, old pal. Scott was almost asleep when the cart stopped. He growled and pulled himself upright. They were back at the Lecter. Need help? No. Fucking Judas. He got out of the cart okay, but discovered that his legs weren't particularly interested in staying straight. Tom grabbed one of his arms and pulled it over his own shoulder. Scott leaned on him heavily. Yeah, okay. He shuffled along next to Tom as they walked into the second loading ramp. She can't treat me like that, you know. Maybe you want to go back and tell her that, Tom said. What's with the lights? Prindle's team is getting sloppy. Maintenance is going to hell. Scott sighed. Fuck the lights. But you know what I mean, right? I mean, I'm a goddamn star pilot, you know? On top of the humiliation of it all, he was getting a huge headache. Tom leaned him up against the wall. Hang on a sec, let me get a light. Scott went on. Who the fuck does she think she is, you know? He stared at the floor. Goddamn rinth all over the place. Looked like one of them had thrown up on the floor. He towed the puddle of wet, mucousy goo with one foot and then looked away quickly. That was enough to make his stomach pretty damn unhappy. She's corporate, said Tom. She pulled rank on you. He reappeared holding a flashlight and reached out to steady Scott with his free arm. That's not all she pulled, said Scott glumly. I think my back is broken or something. Who in the hell left this hatch open? Tom stepped forward and shined the light into the dark rinth pen. You're not listening to me. Scott leaned back on the wall. Fuck the hatch. Hey, Ackland warned you, right? Tom's voice had taken on an echo-like quality. He had walked into the pen. With the last of his coordination, Scott followed him, narrowly missing a renegade doorway. Rinth puke everywhere. Tom continued. But you wouldn't listen, no. You just had to go mess with the queen. Tom stopped short. The flashlight hit the floor and a low hiss filled the room, coming from all around. B. Scott shook his head and followed Tom's gaze. There were 4, or 7, or 20. A flurry of horrible images. Long, dark skulls and dripping razor teeth. Gigantic, black, all arms and legs and spiny tails, hissing, moving forward, reaching toward them. Double suns blazed upon Prosperity Wells, banished the shadows, dried men's sweat to chafing, salty crust, erased even the memory of comfort. But on that day, even at Ryushi's shadeless noon, there was darkness. A darkness echoing with the soft, wet sounds of rhythmic movement, the insistent pulse of body against body, a dizzying, wordless thrum, building toward a screaming, feral release. The speed at which the Xenomorph plague spread itself, with the added benefit of confined rinth hosts, was alarming, though an inherent, almost enviable trait of the alien species' propagation. The captive queen, laying an egg containing its own future, another egg layer, had ensured its own species' prosperity. The human interference had left another variable that hindered the hunt. With the Chande, the Yautja leader, fallen, the remaining unblooded had no choice but to fight for their lives under the usurper, the hot-headed, vengeful Tichinde, who called for blood, human, alien, or otherwise. The battle would find its way to Noguchi, who, without knowing just yet, had been preparing for it her entire life. It would also leave Ryushi as barren and desolate as it had been before either species set foot on its surface. As always, I'd like to thank you very much for watching today. I really appreciate it. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like, and you can also subscribe for all the latest videos from the channel. For more on Machiko Noguchi and Dachande, the Brave One, please see the videos in the end screen and in the description box below. A very, very special thanks goes out to WEYLAND YUTANI executives, EmYarUk and Lady Anne, part of the Patreon Hive. I'd also like to welcome our newest WEYLAND YUTANI executive, Mark Fox. Thank you very much for your support, Mr. Fox. If you'd like to join the Hive and support the channel, check out my Patreon page for exclusive posts and contests. In the meantime, you can catch up with Alien Theory over social media. Follow @alien_theory on Twitter and @alientheoryyt on Facebook and Instagram for more. And until next time, this is Alien Theory, signing off.